And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for choosing Across the Fence. I'm Will Michael in for Judy Simpson. Today on the program, we're going to discuss a difficult topic and to some, a controversial state law. Aid in dying has been legal in Vermont since May of 2013. It was with the governor's vocal support that Vermont became the first state to pass a death with dignity law through the legislative process. The organization Compassion and Choices Vermont works to actively educate the public, physicians, and other medical providers about the law. And so joining us this afternoon is the State Director of Compassion and Choices Vermont. It is a pleasure to welcome Linda Waite-Simpson. Linda, thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Now tell us a little bit about the organization, some of the history and the mission. We've been talking about death with dignity, aid with dying, whatever the choice that somebody chooses to put with that. But your organization has been around a little bit longer than that. So again, some of the mission and the history of Compassion and Choices.
Correct. Well, Compassion and Choices is the oldest national organization that supports, educates, and advocates for end-of-life choice, and that includes death with dignity, which has been a law in Oregon and Washington State for a very long time now. So the organization is passionate about making sure that people understand what their rights are under the law and that they have some control and choice when they're facing end-of-life decisions.
Tell us about some of the work specifically here in Vermont.
Well, what happened after the law was passed here is that Compassion and Choices came in with a state director who was here temporarily, but she began working with physicians, doing grand rounds around the state to make sure that physicians had the resources that they needed to be able to work with their patients. And that person left the organization, and I came on last December. So I've been actively working with physicians, reaching out to physicians, making sure that they, again, have the resources that they need, and also reaching out to our volunteer base throughout the state to make sure that communities understand what is available to them and that people understand what their rights are under the law.
Is there a most common question, a frequently asked question that comes up as you meet with physicians in particular?
Well, physicians don't always understand what the medication is that's prescribed. They don't understand what the dose is. They need to really understand how those things interact with the specific disease that a patient may have. And so there are some very clinical questions that physicians may have, and we do connect them with physicians who've been working in this field for a very long time in Oregon and Washington State.
And I'm wondering the same corollary, a frequently or most asked question as you visit. I'm assuming sometimes it's individuals, probably more often maybe community groups, one-on-one, senior centers perhaps. So is there a most commonly asked question that you get there, Linda?
Well, I think a really common question is, how do I talk to my doctor about this and understand making sure that our values are aligned as we go into these end-of-life discussions. It's a very difficult thing for people to talk about. We really advocate for people to have this conversation with their physicians before they get sick so that they understand, even if a physician decides not to participate, that they would at least help their patient find a colleague who will work with them.
You raised an interesting point, and I won't dwell on it, but it does seem in our culture that we often say there are two things that are difficult to talk about. Sexual reproduction or sex and death. Death is not a topic in our culture that is treated as, the same way as it is in other cultures.
You're absolutely right, and I think that the tide is starting to change in that area. There are a number of organizations that have really been working very hard in the state to normalize the discussion of death and end-of-life decisions. Our hospice organizations and the VNAs across the state have been working on a project called Start the Conversation, which is really designed to get people to be thinking about their advance directives and selecting a surrogate decision maker for them. And to,
it's one of the most popular programs we've ever had on Across the Fence. Generated a lot of phone calls, not only to us, but directly to the VNA. Very, and I'm pointing out for our viewers, if they haven't heard of it, it's the VNA's Start the Conversation, a very important piece that does allow us to talk about this.
Right. And if anybody was in Montpelier over the weekend, they would have seen downtown a project called Wake Up to Dying. And this is a brand new organization that is really trying to come to this issue from a storytelling position. And they have art installations, they have audio, people talking about their experiences of their loved ones dying. And then they had some panel discussions on each evening. They had a death cafe. There are actually 2 death cafes that have started up here in Vermont. One is down in Rutland and one is in Montpelier. And these are groups that meet once a month to talk about this issue and to try to get people more comfortable talking about this issue and end-of-life choices. So
we try to put 2 things together, and they're not opposed. You and your organization clearly support death with dignity. So tell us a little bit about why that is, and also, are there situations in which you or the organization wouldn't agree with it?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that we have found is that, and if you talk to physicians who deal with end-of-life care, they will tell you that roughly 5% of the deaths that they see are not what you would call a good death. They're painful. They're patients who have things like bone cancer where you just can't get out ahead of the pain. And in those situations, having a patient be able to control and to achieve some type of peaceful end to their lives at a time of their choosing is really important. There are times when the organization would absolutely not support this, and that would be in a situation where a person was not able to self-ingest. So that's a really important piece of what you have to do to comply with the law. And if a person is being coerced or compelled by an outside agent to maybe make this choice, if a person is clinically depressed as opposed to situationally depressed, would be another reason that we might want to take a step back and look at why the person is really trying to go down this path. And I think those are all really good points of exploration that physicians can do with their patients as they are discussing these issues.
Linda, I think you'd agree vocabulary, how we express these issues are important. There are various names that get attached to it depending on a viewer and their point of view. It has names other than aid in dying or death with dignity. So when I use the phrase is aid in dying, as I say, is that the same thing as assisted suicide or euthanasia, which are some of the other words that have been used, been part of this debate or discussion?
Well, what's different about aid in dying is that it is a legal medical option for terminally ill, competent adults to choose in some states. Assisted suicide is still illegal in Vermont. So if you have somebody who otherwise has a perfectly healthy life ahead of them, who is clinically depressed and who may want to end their life, assisting in that action is still illegal in this state. Euthanasia is actually the application of, an aid in dying from a third party, and that is also illegal in the state. It's interestingly enough, Quebec just recently passed their death with dignity law, and it actually requires a physician to administer the medication to the patient, which is really one step beyond where we have gone with any of this in this country.
So you're mentioning the province of Quebec. Let me come back down across the border. How many states have legalized aid in dying?
The very first state was Oregon, and they were way ahead of the curve, and they fought many, many legal battles to...
They also helped break down some misconceptions, I think, that there was a sense that hundreds of people are dying and choosing to take their life each year, and we actually know after years of study in Oregon, there's data, there's information that you can look at, and it turned out that some of these things just weren't true.
That's absolutely true. 16 years of data shows that the allegations that people were going to be forced and coerced into doing this have not held up. There have been no substantiated claims against, the organizations that support this or physicians that support this.
We're talking about other states considering it, and as other states consider a law, HBO Documentary Films has released a film called How to Die in Oregon, and we're going to take a moment to watch a trailer from that film.
take the medication? I'm going to ask you these 2 questions again.
Sure.
You have the right to change your mind.
My mind's not changing.
And what will this medication do?
It will kill me and make me happy.
Death with dignity. The other side calls it assisted suicide.
I was diagnosed with cancer. I was supposed to have 6 months.
Well, these people have lost so much control, and they'll tell us repeatedly they want the medication for control.
It's this curious limbo. You don't know what's really going to happen, except with Death with Dignity, you do have some control over what's going to happen.
An online survey of physicians showed 50% in favor, 42% against.
We have a tradition in this country to allow patients to deny care, but we've never allowed physicians to actively take somebody's life. That's not the practice of medicine.
First do no harm is going to be different for every patient.
So how are you feeling?
Harm for some patients is saying, no, 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 you've got to do this the way your body decides as opposed to the way you decide.
My son has a little trouble with this.
She says the cancer's come back, I have 6 months to live, and things are going to be fine. That sounds like the opposite of fine.
If I'm in that bed and I'm racked up with a stroke, that's what I want. That's the decent thing to do. So for once in my life, I'll be decent.
If I had an option, I would prefer not to die. Thank you very much.
The Oregon law has been thoroughly tested. Now it's time to get it going in other states.
I just think a society has to be asked, is this what we really want?
My husband did not feel that any government or any religious leader had the right to tell him how long he had to suffer.
I understand there's a kind of dignity in suffering, but there's a certain grace in accepting the inevitable. I can't do anymore.
I think all of us would like to have some options of how we'd take control of our life at the end.
And that is a trailer from HBO Documentary Films. If you're just joining us, I'm visiting with Linda Waite-Simpson. She's the State Director of Compassion and Choices Vermont. It's an organization that is providing education and public support for the Vermont's aid in dying law. And before, Linda, before the clip, we were talking about other states. We mentioned Quebec, Vermont, and Oregon. There are other states that are moving along in this process, including the state of Washington and others.
The state of Washington has had aid in dying legal since 2008, and so they are quite well into their data collection as well. The state of Montana, through judicial decision, has legalized aid in dying as well. There is no statutory framework there, so it has been probably not as widely known. They don't do any data collection, and there really are no kind of statutory requirements for that work there. But the constitutional issue in Montana was that the state has no right to interfere in a physician-patient relationship, and that was paramount in that decision.
Even in the trailer, we learned that you can, you can still have control of your own choices, despite what somebody might think medically. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I'm wondering, since the passage of the law, have you seen increased support for your organization, requests? Again, my question is, increased support for your organization?
Well, currently, Compassion and Choices has about 60,000 members nationwide, and that is a very large support group. We're very pleased. We are working on a big campaign out in California at the moment. There are statutes being introduced across the country, and polls show nationwide that the majority of Americans do believe that this should be an option for people. You may not want to exercise it yourself, but I think people believe that taking that choice away from somebody who might want to go there is really not the right direction.
As we come to a close, Linda, how can our viewers contact your organization, speak with you, learn more about the work you're doing? How can they reach you?
They can call me at 802-881-3189, and we also have an end-of-life resource center where we have trained counselors who will help people, help patients and family members who are dealing with end-of-life decisions. And that number is 800-247-7421. And you can also visit our website at www.compassionandchoices.org.
Linda, a fascinating discussion, and I want to thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
That is our program for today. We know you have choices, so thanks for choosing us. I'm Will Michael, inviting you to join us back here each weekday afternoon for another visit across the fence.